I first want to get you to start with Tulsi Gabbard as DNI. What is your reaction?
Well, again, this is a tough job bureaucratically because you have to essentially coordinate, I think it's 17 or so separate intelligence agencies. And someone who doesn't have a background working in one or more of them to suddenly be thrust in the position where you have to oversee all of them, tough leap. So, some legitimate questions in addition to sorts of things you were just talking about with Jay about what she said after she visited Syria.
Let's go to Pete Hegseth. I want to play a little bit from a podcast that he did just last week. This is regarding the war in Ukraine and how he saw that war and Vladimir Putin. Let's play it.
From the beginning, like a couple days in, I was like, this feels like a Putin's give me my back war. It kind of feels like I feel like you've been pushing pretty hard, and we used to have the former Soviet Union, and we were pretty proud of that. And Ukraine was a part of it, and all these other countries. And I want my back. And this idea that I hear all the time, and I've friends who would probably agree with us on most things. They're like, well, if you don't stop him in Ukraine, then he's going to go all the way to Poland. And he's going. I don't think he's. I mean, maybe in a perfect world where he had unlimited capabilities and he could crown himself king of Europe, he would. I think he's probably knows enough to know that it's probably not going much further than Ukraine.
What do you make of his confidence that Vladimir Putin just wants a piece of Ukraine or all of Ukraine, and that's it, and doesn't want to rebuild the USSR or extend further into Europe?
Well, even if he's right, I would still say that's unacceptable. The idea that we would simply roll out the carpet for Vladimir Putin to invade and ultimately take territory from another country, a country such as Ukraine, which, by the way, is a democracy, is part of the West, I think is unacceptable. The real question for this administration, beyond any individual, is what they're going to do. We all know President-elect Trump wants to promote diplomacy with Ukraine. The real question is, what's the substance of the diplomacy? Does he try to impose a peace on Ukraine? I think he'll fail. Is he prepared to pressure Vladimir Putin? The only way we could get a peace that has any chance of lasting is if we're supportive of Ukraine, but at the same time we say you've got to narrow your goals. You've got to be willing to allow the Russians to hold on to some of the territory they now have, at least temporarily, and we have to go to Russia. You shouldn't kid yourself. If you don't agree to a compromise, we are going to support Ukraine, and this war is going to get increasingly costly to you. The administration, I think, can get to peace, or at least an interim, a temporary armistice or peace agreement in Ukraine, but only if it puts pressure on both sides. And it's a one-sided approach is doomed to fail.
I mentioned at the top of the show, Daniel Drezner, writing in Foreign Affairs magazine, that world leaders, big and small, now know who Donald Trump is. They've had experience with him. They understand that you can flatter him and not get sideways of him, and generally that he's transactional. You can get what you want out of him if you maybe project something showy, some sort of showy concession that he can promote here at home. That being said, Donald Trump has always had NATO in his sights, and he was held back from disengaging with NATO, pulling out of NATO by the people he had in his last administration. He's not surrounding himself with those type of people any longer. Pete Hegseth, not a big believer in NATO. He said so on the record. What are our NATO allies expecting, and what are they doing to prepare themselves for the possibility, if they're preparing for it, of the United States either pulling out or disengaging?
I don't think we pull out or disengage, but what the president-elect has already done is introduce a degree of uncertainty about whether we are going to honor our so-called Article 5 commitments to come to the aid of other NATO countries. That's a fact of life. So the real question for the Europeans is, do they spend more in defense? Do they build up defense industries of their own? Do they coordinate what spending they now have? The problem in Europe, Katie, is not so much how much the Europeans spend, but how they spend it. Each country has its own defense budget, so the whole is less than the sum of its parts. What we need is a real European defense effort. We're not seeing it, but that's what they ought to get serious about, and that's true. Let me just make the argument. Donald Trump may accelerate that, but I've been watching this for a long time. I actually think the era of American foreign policy, where Europe and NATO are at the center of things, that era is ending. We're much more concerned with China. We're much more concerned with the Asia Pacific. So I actually think the Europeans have to become somewhat more self-sufficient. Again, Trump's going to accelerate that, but that's happening anyhow.
What about the Middle East? It's not the same place as it was when Donald Trump was in office. Obviously, it's full of conflict right now, and tensions are very high. He made his first trip to Saudi Arabia last time around, which was a surprise, but maybe not a bad move on the part of the Trump administration as he tried to accelerate relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. How does Donald Trump's approach to Israel look to you, or what do you expect it to be now that things are so much more volatile?
Well, you're going to be surprised, I think, at what I'm saying, but Donald Trump is going to have some real opportunity in the Middle East. Israel has militarily changed the situation fundamentally in both Gaza and Lebanon. So there's possibilities for real diplomatic breakthroughs if the Israeli government will act, will go towards them, if they'll essentially harvest what they've sown, and if the United States pushes Israel to do it. So I think there's a chance. We could have a ceasefire in Gaza. We could have the entry of an Arab stabilization force. We could have a ceasefire in the north between Israel and Hezbollah. 60,000 Israelis could return to their homes. Israel and Iran could essentially stand down. All those things are possible. But what it will require is for President Trump to push his good friend Bibi Netanyahu to do things that he's resisted doing. We'll see if he's willing to do that. If he wants to do that, if he's prepared to do that, he actually could be the peace president in the Middle East that he likes to describe himself as.
Does that involve pressuring him on settlements? I mean, already the far-right minister, Smotrich in particular, says that 2025 with Donald Trump in the White House is the year that Israel will get to annex more of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria.
Look, there are those views in this Israeli coalition. There are those views in Israel. I think that's bad for the future of Israel if it wants to remain a democratic Jewish state. I don't think the United States does any favor to Israel by essentially giving them the green light to do that. We've looked the other way for decades. Yes, that will be another choice for Donald Trump. What does it mean now to be a real friend of Israel? And I would argue that's not necessarily good for Israel. It's certainly not good for our bilateral relationship. But that's probably going to be an issue that's going to come to a President Trump. There's powerful forces in Israel that want to go ahead with more settlements, with annexation. It's quite possible some of the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, if he gets confirmed, would want to green light that. I simply think that's unacceptable. It would poison Israel's relations with the Arab world. Yeah. And I think ultimately it would threaten Israel's viability as a democratic Jewish country. So we ought to think before we greenlight that.